Not all journeys lead to adventure and laughter. Sometimes, the road to an exciting getaway takes a dark and unexpected turn. These are stories of seemingly ordinary trips that unravel into chilling experiences, leaving those who dared embark upon them forever changed. We've all heard of fun weekends in the mountains, quiet getaways in the woods, or carefree vacations with friends. But what happens when something lurking in the shadows turns these moments into nightmares? In this series, we explore tales where isolation reveals its sinister side, where a serene forest is not as empty as it seems, and where the bond between friends is tested by the eerie unknown. Each story delves into the fears that often linger at the edges of adventure, the fear of the unfamiliar, the haunting suspicion that there's something just out of sight, watching and waiting. Join us as we recount 4 unsettling tales, each beginning with the promise of escape, but ending in a way no one could have imagined. From abandoned cabins to unexpected visitors, these journeys will make you question what lies beyond the comfort of the known and weather some. Story 1. It was supposed to be an adventure, a chance for a group of friends to reconnect. When Mario invited Sarah, Ivan, and me to his family's mountain lodge, it sounded like the perfect way to escape the stress of school and the daily grind. None of us had ever heard of the place before, and Mario's casual mention of it came out of nowhere. But the idea of a secluded lodge nestled in the mountains felt like the adventure we needed. The journey began with an uncomfortable car ride up a winding road, guided by Mario's uncle. He drove an old, creaky truck that seemed to growl with each steep climb. His demeanor was strange. He barely spoke a word to us, kept his eyes fixed on the road, and had a nervous twitch that seemed to worsen with every turn. The air inside the truck was heavy, and all of us, except Mario, felt uneasy, as if something intangible was warning us to turn back. Finally, we arrived at the lodge, and our first sight of it wasn't what we'd imagined. Instead of a cozy cabin, it looked almost like an ancient, forgotten building. The wood was dark and weathered. The windows were coated in dust, and vines crawled up the sides, as if trying to pull the place into the ground. Despite the eerie feeling, Mario assured us that everything would be great and that we would soon feel at home. The first night was quiet but restless. We tried to settle in, but it was clear that there was something off about the place. The rooms were colder than they should have been, and the walls seemed to echo with faint sounds that none of us could place. Mario was the only one who didn't seem bothered. He laughed at our discomfort, telling us we were just paranoid because we were so far from civilization. As the days went on, things only got stranger. The second morning, Ivan couldn't find his jacket. It was an old jacket, but it had sentimental value to him. We searched everywhere, but it seemed to have disappeared. Later that day, Sarah complained that her journal was missing. Small things began to vanish one by one. An earring, a flashlight, even a pack of cards we had been using to play games. At first, we laughed it off as someone playing a joke, but it soon became apparent that there was nothing funny about it. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispers. They were soft, almost drowned by the creaking of the lodge, but they were there. I lay still in my bed, straining to hear. The whispers seemed to be coming from the hallway, right outside our room. My heart pounded as I quietly slipped out of bed, trying to peer into the darkness. The whispers stopped abruptly, and I was left in silence, staring into the empty hallway. The following morning, I mentioned the whispers to Mario, who only shrugged and told me I was probably dreaming. But the looks on Sarah and Ivan's faces told me they had heard something too. We decided to explore the lodge more thoroughly, hoping to understand why it felt so off. In our search, we found a door in the basement that had been hidden behind old, dusty furniture. It was locked, but a chilling draft seeped through the cracks around it. That night, I saw Mario sneaking downstairs. I followed quietly, watching as he moved the furniture again and unlocked the door. What lay beyond was something I could barely comprehend, a small room filled with strange symbols carved into the walls. In the center was a crude wooden chair, and around it, scattered on the floor, were all the items that had gone missing over the past few days. My heart sank when I saw Ivan's jacket draped over the chair, alongside Sarah's journal, open with pages torn out. I backed away, bumping into an old shelf that creaked loudly. Mario turned around, his eyes wide and wild, as if caught in some forbidden ritual. I ran back upstairs, trying not to make a sound, and woke Sarah and Ivan. Without explaining much, I insisted that we had to leave immediately. They saw the fear in my eyes and didn't question it. We grabbed whatever we could and quietly made our way out of the lodge. As we stepped outside, the cold mountain air hit us, but it felt liberating compared to the suffocating atmosphere of that house. Just as we reached the old truck, we heard the door of the lodge slam open. Mario stood there, his silhouette barely visible in the dim moonlight, and for a moment, I thought he would come after us. But he just stood there, watching, as we drove away into the darkness. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town. Exhausted and terrified, we decided to stay at a small motel for the rest of the night. None of us spoke much, and when morning came, we made our way home, leaving the nightmare of that mountain lodge far behind. To this day, I don't know what Mario was doing in that basement or why he seemed so different during our stay. We haven't talked to him since, and honestly, none of us are eager to. That trip was supposed to be about fun and friendship, but instead, it turned into something darker. An experience that left us all haunted, unable to forget the feeling that whatever secrets lay in that lodge were never meant to be uncovered. Story 2. My family has always been a bit different. While most people vacation in tropical destinations or visit famous landmarks, my family likes to rent isolated cabins in the woods for a week of hunting, hiking, and playing outdoor games. That winter, we rented a large cabin in Vermont. It was more of a rustic mansion, really something old and grand, hidden deep in the forest. As strange as it sounds, this trip included a massive game of laser tag that we played every year, a family tradition taken to extreme levels. We had all gathered in the living room on the second-to-last night of our stay. The rules were simple. Everyone for themselves, and the last person not tagged wins a substantial cash prize and family bragging rights. My uncle Lucian was the mastermind behind the whole event, always eager to make things more exciting. This year was my first time playing, as I had just turned 18. I was thrilled. The thrill of the game was something I had been waiting for years. We each took our equipment, which was more advanced than any regular laser tag gear. Lucian had a passion for these games, so he made sure the gear was as high-tech as possible, complete with scopes and tracking devices. As soon as we were geared up, we set a timer on our phones, each counting down 10 minutes before we would all scatter into the dark, snowy woods. When the timer went off, everyone sprinted into the forest. Most of my family went uphill, so I decided to head downhill instead, figuring fewer people would go that way. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I made my way deeper into the woods, the cold air biting at my face. I found a spot behind a thick tree and took a moment to catch my breath, peeking out to make sure no one was nearby. The thrill of hiding in the dark, knowing someone might be looking for you, was exhilarating at first, but then things took a strange turn. After a while, I heard a faint noise, a crackling sound, like someone stepping on a branch. I ducked down, hiding behind the tree, and strained my ears. I knew the sound didn't come from any of my relatives. It was too soft, too deliberate, like someone who knew exactly how to move without being detected. After a few tense minutes, I peeked around the tree, expecting to see a familiar face. Instead, in the distance, I caught sight of a figure. They were standing far enough away that I couldn't make out any details, but they weren't moving. They just stood there, partially hidden behind a tree, as if they were watching. My first instinct was to call out, but something told me to stay silent. I slowly began to move away, trying not to make any noise, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, my laser tag marker started blinking. I froze. There was no one near me, no one that I could see. And then, as if on cue, A laser beam shot directly at my chest. It was deliberate, aimed, but when I looked up, I couldn't see where it had come from. It felt like someone was toying with me. Panic set in. I began to run uphill, slipping in the snow, my breath fogging up in the cold air. The forest around me was dead silent except for the crunching of my own steps. I could feel eyes on me, but every time I turned, there was nothing but trees and darkness. I knew I had to get back to the cabin, where it would be safe. As I neared the top of the hill, I finally saw someone, my cousin Corbin. He was walking slowly, his laser gun dangling in one hand, clearly unaware of the situation. I ran towards him, but before I could shout, I noticed something. In the distance behind Corbin, I saw two figures. They were barely visible, silhouettes in the moonlight, but they weren't part of my family. They were dressed differently, moving in a way that was too calm, too deliberate. Suddenly, one of the figures lifted something. It looked like a flashlight, but instead of shining a beam, it just blinked once, almost like a signal. That's when Corbin turned around, saw me, and his face twisted in confusion. I ran towards him, screaming at him to move, to run. He finally understood, and we both sprinted together, heading back to the cabin. The snow made every step exhausting, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The cabin's lights came into view, a beacon in the dark, and I knew we were close. As we burst through the tree line and onto the clearing, I saw my Uncle Lucian on the porch. He was holding his hunting rifle, a grim look on his face. He fired 3 shots into the air, and I heard the footsteps behind us come to a sudden stop. We stumbled onto the porch, collapsing in exhaustion, our breaths ragged. Lucian pulled us inside, locking the door behind us. He didn't ask any questions. He just told us to stay quiet. The rest of the family gathered, and the atmosphere in the room was tense. We waited in silence, listening for any sign of movement outside. Hours passed, and finally, just before dawn, Lucian opened the door and looked out. There was nothing, no footprints, no figures, just the untouched snow. The next morning, we packed up and left the cabin earlier than planned. No one spoke much during the ride back. It was as if we all silently agreed to leave whatever happened in those woods behind. To this day, I don't know who those figures were or what they wanted, but the fear I felt that night, the feeling of being hunted by something or someone unknown, has never left me. Story 3. It was supposed to be a simple getaway. Just 4 friends looking to escape the pressures of work and school. We found an Airbnb tucked away in a secluded forest in Lake County, California. It had everything we wanted. A hot tub, an old-fashioned fireplace, and a peaceful view of the woods. It wasn't your typical spring break destination, but we didn't mind. In fact, the isolation was part of its appeal. We arrived at the Airbnb just after sunset, and I won't lie, the place had an eerie vibe. It was surrounded by trees, with only one neighbor's house barely visible through the dense woods. The cabin itself was charming but worn, wooden beams, creaky floors, and windows that looked out into nothing but darkness. Calvin, who was driving, parked his cramped Mini Cooper, and we all laughed at how ridiculous it looked, surrounded by the wilderness. We were excited, despite the eerie atmosphere. My girlfriend Ally, her best friend Lila, and Calvin all seemed ready to unwind. The first night went smoothly. We lit a fire in the old fireplace, opened a bottle of wine, and played a few games. We had talked about getting into the hot tub, but Calvin seemed strangely reluctant, so we decided to wait until the next night. I chalked it up to exhaustion after the long drive. Still, that first night, I remember lying in bed, feeling oddly unsettled, like the house itself was somehow watching us. The second night, we managed to convince Calvin to join us in the hot tub. The hot tub was inside a small, screened-in room attached to the back of the house. It was perfect, cozy, steamy, and private. We played some music, laughed, and had a few drinks. It felt like we were finally getting into the spirit of things. But then, out of nowhere, a bright flash of light lit up the room. For a split second, I thought it was lightning, but it wasn't storming. The light was blinding, filling the entire space for just a moment. The laughter stopped instantly. I quickly turned down the music, and we all exchanged nervous glances. I got out of the hot tub, my skin tingling from the cold air, and walked over to the screen door that led to the deck. I peered out into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything, just a pitch-black forest. Then I heard it, a strange clicking noise, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere in the woods. A few seconds later, another click, from a different direction, followed by a low whistle. My heart started pounding, and an uneasy feeling washed over me. I turned back and told the others we should go inside. Nobody argued. We quickly dried off, wrapping ourselves in towels, and made our way back into the house. We tried to laugh it off, but there was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken fear. We sat in the living room, trying to distract ourselves with a movie, but no one was really paying attention. Every small noise made us jump. Then came the knocking. It started softly, just a faint tap on the front door. We all froze. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. Lila and Ally were visibly shaken, their eyes wide with fear. I gestured for Calvin to call the police while I went to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. I was scared, but adrenaline pushed me to protect everyone. I shouted towards the door, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Whoever's out there, I've got a weapon." The knocking stopped. For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by our nervous breathing. Calvin said he had called the police, but we knew they could be miles away, and we were truly isolated. A few minutes passed, and just when we thought it might be over, the window in the living room shattered. Someone had thrown a large rock through it. Glass sprayed across the floor, and the girls screamed. I yelled for everyone to get upstairs, and we ran, slamming the bedroom door behind us. My heart was pounding, every instinct telling me to be ready for whatever came next. I waited, listening for any sounds of movement downstairs, but instead, I heard nothing. Cautiously, I moved back towards the shattered window. There, on the floor, was a rock. Wrapped around it, a piece of paper. I picked it up, my hands trembling. In large, jagged letters it read, "You shouldn't be here." The next few minutes felt like hours. We huddled in the bedroom, listening to every creak and groan of the house. Eventually, we saw the flashing lights of a police car through the window. Relief washed over us, and we rushed downstairs as the officers arrived. They searched the property thoroughly but found nothing. No signs of anyone, no tracks, nothing but the shattered window and the threatening note. We didn't stay to find out more. We packed our things that night and left as soon as the police assured us it was safe. The Airbnb host later gave us a refund, though they refused to answer our questions about the place. Ally believes that there was something the host wasn't telling us. Maybe a previous incident, or some dark secret about the property. Whatever the reason, none of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched, that someone or something wanted us gone. To this day, I haven't used Airbnb again. The fear of that night, the feeling of being vulnerable and hunted in a place that was supposed to be a haven, still lingers. Isolation has always carried with it an unsettling potential. Removed from the comforts of the familiar, we find ourselves vulnerable, facing not just the challenges of survival, but also the eerie feeling that something might be watching from the shadows. These stories have taken us deep into forgotten lodges, hidden cabins, and secluded rentals. Places that seem innocent at first, but harbor something darker beneath the surface. The allure of an escape to these remote places can quickly turn into a nightmare when the boundary between reality and the unknown blurs. In isolation, the mind plays tricks, ordinary objects vanish, and strangers appear out of nowhere, turning peaceful retreats into terrifying experiences. It's a reminder that some mysteries are better left untouched, and that what waits in these places, far from civilization, may be more than we bargained for. As we step away from these tales, the common thread becomes clear. The dangers of isolation and the unknown are very real. Sometimes, The need for adventure leads us to places that have their own secrets, secrets that might not want to be uncovered. And perhaps some journeys are better left untaken.